This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Since I started, at least at the beginning of the announcements, during the announcements, I invited you to let me know where the mistakes in the bulletin were. Aside from my reading the wrong gospel in the first place there, we sang the We Three Kings. What parts of that hymn, I think written in 1867, what parts of that hymn are not found in the Bible? You could say it louder. They're not kings, right? It says, well, I'll get to that in a second. And it doesn't give any number of them, does it? There's nothing that says three kings. Why do you think they call them three kings? It makes it easier for the presents, right? They know how many thank you notes to write. 3 presents, 3 kings. But the other part that's not in the Bible is the kings. They're not kings in the Bible. And even though it says in the Bible they're wise men, they're not wise men in the Bible either. The word is magi. Now, when you hear magi, something like that, what phrase, what name in English, what description in English does it conjure for you? Magician. Not wise men, right? Wise men, you're thinking of the kind of people who do TED Talks, right? But magician, you're thinking of somebody who's good with sleight of hand and cards and might make you look this direction when you should be looking this direction, or maybe cut somebody in half or something, right? Would it surprise you to know that even in that time, people who were called magi weren't necessarily considered the top tier of society? I was really surprised when I read a commentator this week, and it's one that I use it's a woman whose work I use quite a bit, but when she was commenting on this, she made it seem like the Magi were the astrophysicists of their day. They were the people who write the astrology column that you get in the tabloids. That's what these people were. And I want to say this not so much to detract from them, but to make sure you have them in the proper context. These were not people like the stars on the red carpet at the film festival. These were people who you wouldn't necessarily want to sit next to on the bus or ride your donkey next to on the road. They were people who were marginalized. They were people who were on the edges of society, as much as people like that are today. But they were on a quest. There was something that got these kind of oddball, marginalized people in one country, probably Persia, now Iran, to go all the way to Jerusalem, following a star in a quest for something they believed that God was doing in the world. Now, nothing can take away from their commitment. Nothing can take away from the sacrifices they made to do that. Can you imagine going home after work one day and say, oh, by the way, dear, I'm going to Israel next week on a quest. I don't know when I'll be back. Saw a star. I'm on my way. Can you imagine how that conversation would go at home? I don't think it would have gone any better then, because it was even more difficult and more dangerous to accomplish that kind of a journey. They were on their journey, and they arrived in Jerusalem, and they announced to everybody, okay, where's this kid who's to be king of the Judeans? Well, Herod is a little perplexed because he says, wait, I'm the king of the Judeans. And they're asking this question. And so Herod gets everybody together, and then Herod comes up with a line when he summoned them secretly, and the line that Herod has for them is he says, go and search diligently for them, for the Messiah. And when you find where he is, come back and tell me so I can go and worship. And we're going to leave the Herod part of this right now. But you know, that sense of diligence, diligently searching for the one whom the star has called them to find, I think they've already done that. They did that when they left their home country, when they made all of the arrangements to get to the place where they were. And their due diligence brought them to the palace in Jerusalem, because all of the hard work that they did in following the star left them with the idea that this is somebody pretty important. He's probably going to be in a palace. And so when Herod says, search diligently for the child, they walk out the front door of the palace, see the star, walk 5.6 miles to Bethlehem, find the star over not a manger, but a house, and they go in and they see the baby. Their due diligence was leading them all the way up to Jerusalem, but God had something else in mind for them. Now, their quest ultimately resulted in their getting to this house and going in and seeing Jesus and being absolutely blown away by what God was doing. They rejoiced, they were excited, and they shared the gifts that they had brought for this new baby king. All of us are in some way or another on a quest. Sometimes we think about it like we have Epiphany here. We think of Epiphany as the end of their quest. And it's kind of hard to figure out what Epiphany means for us. It's the unveiling of the Messiah to the world. It's the revealing of what God has in store, not just for one group of people, but for everybody, and it's being shared with literally representatives of the entire world. And perhaps the best summary of that is in Ephesians. When in Ephesians it says, and with the eyes of your heart enlightened, you might be able to receive the hope that God has for you. Now, I would think that for any of us on a quest, the idea that our quest is for a hope that God is laying out in front of us, and that it requires not necessarily, ultimately it ends up requiring that the eyes of our heart are enlightened. So we've got two phrases. We've got Herod saying, diligently seek, and we've got Ephesians that tells us, with the eyes of your heart enlightened, you might receive the hope that God has laid out for you. In our sense of journeying and being on a quest, we in the church have all sorts of ways to encourage you in being diligent. One of the ways is we ask you to pray, right? Prayer is a big part of being a Christian, being part of the church. Another is reading the Bible. We encourage people regularly to read the Bible so that they understand the story, so they don't go to the palace in Jerusalem instead of going to the house in Bethlehem. We encourage people to do that. We encourage people to take action in ways that care for other people so that they might know that God cares for them. We take actions that make sure people understand we feel we are acting on God's behalf when we care for one another. Those are part of the ways that we diligently seek after an epiphany with God. But just as the Magi found that all of their diligence led them to the wrong place, and then they went ahead further and followed the star, and they experienced that kind of aha, where they found Jesus, I think that is very typical for the kinds of ways that we respond to these quests. The church likes to feel like we control this for y'all. We tell you what scriptures to read. We organize how you pray, and we come and we organize the prayers together and everything else. But the reality is that the hope that God has for each of us is, in addition to being the truth that we teach as the church, something that each of us has to discover. Nothing in Ephesians said, and when Andrew enlightens the eyes of your heart, it says when the eyes of your heart are enlightened, we assume by God, you'll understand it. I have had conversations with people over the last few weeks. I've had a couple who want to get married in the church. They're not church people. And there was evidently a disagreement amongst the couple, between the members of the couple. One of them thought, well, we're going to get married, we've got to go to the church. And the other one says, well, why would we go to the church? What have they done for us? And so that one got the assignment of calling and talking to Father Andrew. And when I'm talking, the person says, well, what do we have to do? And I laid out, here's how it's part of the community, do this. And I said, if you're not familiar with the church, just come and see. And if this feels like the kind of place that you would like to support your relationship and your marriage, then maybe there's something to do with this. Otherwise, you got all sorts of other options. Okay. Well, a week after the first visit, and I didn't know when I met them that was the same person who'd called me on the phone, they decided they did want to go ahead and get married. And as we're sitting down to talk about it, one of the things that came up says, well, I wasn't in favor of it. But I talked to you on the phone, and you said, come and see, check it out. And I did, and I want to come back. Their life had been one where their diligent seeking took them in all sorts of places and took them away from anything that looked like church. But when an occasion came up where they wanted to get married and they were going to kind of old habitual ways of how do you do this, they had a kind of a moment. Oh gosh, I don't know. That's not been part of our life. Do we want to do that? And they checked it out, and in a sense, the eyes of their heart were enlightened, and the hope of God was laid out for them in a new way, and they said, I want to come back. I've not been to church in 25 years, and I look forward to coming back next week. So all of us have callings on quests. We can all diligently seek for what it is we think God is laying out for us, but the reality of the Magi and the reality of other people's experience is that after we've run through all the things that we can organize ourselves to figure out, God may have something else in mind. And we may find the eyes of our heart enlightened, and we may have our own aha moment about where God is laying out hope in front of us. And I think that if there's anything we can gain from Epiphany, it's that sense of being people whose hearts are enlightened and who have God's hope in front of us, and perhaps we can even point other people to that blessed hope of God. Amen.